They moved deeper, descending narrow stairways and passing through long-forgotten corridors where the air felt colder. At each turn, they found signs of ruin, collapsed walls, broken statues, and the remnants of ancient battles. Weapons rusted to dust and shattered helms lay scattered like offerings to time. By midday, they had reached the third level, where broken archways and hanging chains whispered of dwarven forges now cold and lifeless. The grandeur of the city weighed upon them, even as unease began to creep in. More than once, Nix halted, crouching to examine faint footprints in the dust.
Not ours.
He said quietly.
And not old.
Vaeloris nodded grimly.
Mountains crowned with golden light, rivers gleam like blades so bright. Dragons rise where dawn is born, breathing fire through skies reborn. Dwarfs beneath the stony halls, hammer echoes, anvils call, forging rings and blades of might. Their craft ignites the heart of night, where wonders dance and dragons fly. Magic paints the endless sky, mysteries carved in earth and stone, a realm that sings a world unknown. Hearts will race and dreams will soar, through lands unseen we'll find much more.
Goblins, they still linger here, but whether they watch us now, I cannot say.
As the light began to fade, Vaeloris called for their retreat.
We have seen enough for today,
he said.
The vault lies deeper still, perhaps on the 5th level, but night approaches. We will not face the dark unprepared.
They retraced their steps carefully, emerging from the ruins as dusk settled over the mountains. Back at their camp, the fire was lit once more, but conversation was subdued. The shadow of Tharok Thûm loomed behind them, a silent reminder of what lay ahead. Vaeloris remained awake through the night, his sharp elven senses attuned to the stillness surrounding their camp. The fire had burned low, casting faint flickers of light against the towering walls of Tharok Thûm. But as the hour deepened, a faint rustle broke the quiet, too deliberate, too measured to be the wind. His hand fell to the hilt of his blade. Rising soundlessly, he stepped through the shadows and roused the others with a quiet urgency.
On your feet,
he hissed.
We are not alone. Ready yourselves. It's an ambush.
Selara's breath caught, but she steeled herself, clutching her pendant of Solvian. Falling to her knees, she began to pray aloud, her voice trembling but resolute.
O Solvian, keeper of light and guardian of the faithful, shine forth thy grace upon us in this hour of peril. Let thy radiance scatter the shadows that seek to devour. May thy shield stand between us and the claws of darkness. Guide our blades, steady our hands, and fortify our hearts. Let no evil triumph while thy light endures. By thy mercy grant us strength, and by thy will deliver us.
Her final words rang clear in the night.
Blessed Solvian, grant me thy miracle.
As she raised her hands, a sphere of light burst into being above them, piercing the gloom and bathing the clearing in radiant gold. The air shimmered, and a faint blue glow enveloped the adventurers, while their foes, 20 goblins, were cast in crimson light, their outlines revealed among the trees. Andreas drew his sword, the blade catching the light, and took his stance.
Come then,
He roared.
let's see what filth dares crawl from the dark.
With a cry, he charged. Nix had already vanished, slipping into the shifting shadows cast by the orb. The goblins shrieked, their ranks breaking as one fell, a dagger appearing in its throat before Nix vanished once more. Selara remained kneeling, her hands lifted toward the light as she whispered prayers. From her pendant poured waves of faint energy, shielding her companions and driving fear into the hearts of the goblins. Vaeloris stood still, his gaze sweeping the battlefield. He watched as Andreas fought fiercely, his sword cleaving through goblins with strength and desperation. Nix darted in and out of the fray, striking unseen and disappearing before their foes could react. But the enemy pressed harder, their numbers driving the young adventurers into retreat. Vaeloris' voice cut through the din.
Hold fast, do not falter.
Yet he saw the tide turning. their strength beginning to waver. At last, the elf raised his hands, his eyes narrowing as arcane energy crackled around him.
Enough!
He cried, his voice echoing through the clearing. Lightning burst forth, arcing through the goblins in chains of blue fire. The air crackled with raw energy as, one by one, the creatures fell, scorched and broken. The last of them turned to flee, but Vaeloris' blade flashed, and silence fell once more. The adventurers caught their breath, their eyes wide as the light of Selara's spell dimmed. Vaeloris turned to them, his expression stern.
This battle was but a glimpse of what lies ahead. Gather your strength. You will need it.
The morning sun broke over the horizon, spilling light across the jagged peaks of Tharok Thûm. Vaeloris stood, his gaze fixed upon the fortress as the adventurers stirred and readied themselves. He instructed,
We leave the camp behind. If fortune favors us, we will return by nightfall. If not,
he paused, his emerald eyes glinting with resolve.
then may the fates be kind.
The group entered the fortress once more, descending through its winding corridors and shadowed halls. Dust clung thick to the air, and their footsteps echoed like whispers of forgotten ghosts. They pressed deeper, passing collapsed archways and broken statues, until at last, they reached the 5th level. Before them loomed the vault, a monolithic door of iron and stone, bound with runes that flickered faintly as Vaeloris pressed the key into its lock. The ground trembled as ancient mechanisms groaned to life, gears grinding and chains rattling. The sound of stone shifting roared through the halls, too loud to be ignored. And then, in the distance, came the echo of drums. The adventurers froze as the rhythmic pounding grew louder, accompanied by a horn's mournful wail. Vaeloris' voice cut through the rising dread.
Quickly!
He ordered, pulling the magical satchel from his pack.
Fill it! Take everything!
Inside the vault, gold and jewels glittered in the dim light. Scrolls and relics lay scattered across carved pedestals, their ancient inscriptions untouched by time. Andreas and Selara moved swiftly, gathering treasures as Nix darted to the corners, stuffing smaller artifacts into the enchanted bag. The drums beat faster. Vaeloris' sharp voice rang out.
We are out of time! Move! After you gather everything from the vault run, if you falter, you die.
Drawing his blade, the elf turned toward the corridor.
I'll hold them back!
With that, he disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading as the echo of steel clashed with goblin cries. Explosions rocked the halls, shaking the ground as if the mountain itself stirred. The adventurers stumbled, but did not stop, pouring treasure into the bag until nothing remained.
That's it.
Andreas shouted, hoisting the satchel.
We have to go.
Nix led the way, weaving through the collapsing tunnels, while Selara followed, her prayers barely audible over the chaos. Andreas brought up the rear, sword drawn and ready, but their path was blocked. Fallen rubble sealed the main passage. They doubled back, dodging debris as more explosions rang out. Vaeloris' voice echoed distantly, shouting incantations as bursts of fire and lightning lit the halls. At last they reached the entrance. The camp was in ruins, scattered by falling stones. Vaeloris emerged from the smoke, bloodied and bruised, clutching his arm.
Run? I can't hold them much longer.
Raising his arms, he roared.
Fireball!
A massive explosion erupted behind him, scattering goblins and collapsing the tunnel's mouth. He cast again, his breath ragged, until the blast forced the Horde to hesitate. As the mountain groaned, Vaeloris drew upon the last of his strength, raising his hands to the sky. His voice thundered, each word reverberating with arcane power.
Flames eternal, born of wrath, cleave the shadows, scorch the path. Ancient tongues and embers bright, summon now thy endless light. By my will and fire's breath, let this storm deliver death.
The runes on his palms ignited, and the air quivered with raw energy.
5th tier magic, hellfire.
He cried, unleashing a torrent of flame that roared through the cavern. Waves of fire spiraled outward, consuming goblins and stone alike. Smoke and ash billowed, and the ground quaked as the mountain itself seemed to cry out in defiance of the spell's fury. Turning to the adventurers, Vaeloris shouted.
We're leaving!
Without waiting, he cast a flight spell, lifting them into the air. They soared above the ruins as the goblin horde poured out in a swarm below. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, their cries echoing through the valley. But the adventurers did not look back. The fires of the mountain raged behind them as they fled into the dawn. The young adventurers looked on in horror as they flew, their eyes fixed on the elf who hovered at their side, his robes torn and bloodied, his strength waning. Yet his resolve did not falter, for he knew the spell holding them aloft demanded his unbroken focus. One lapse, and they would all fall to their doom, swallowed by the tide of goblins surging below. Whispers of panic spread among the group.
He said there were no armies, only scattered goblins.
Andreas cried.
He said there were no armies, only scattered goblins.
Selara clutched her pendant tightly, her voice rising in prayer.
O Solvian, guide us through this darkness. Shield us from despair and light our path to safety.
Moments later, she raised her hands and called out.
Third tier magic, folly of the enemies.
A radiant light descended upon the forest below, and where it touched the goblins, their movement slowed. Many collapsed, their limbs failing them as divine energy overcame their bodies. Yet others resisted, their snarling faces contorted with rage. Nix hurled small orbs into the chaos. They exploded on impact, releasing clouds of choking gas that further hindered their pursuers.
This'll buy us time.
Nix shouted.
Keep moving.
Ancient forests, vast and wide. Elves who walk with trees as guides. Children born of bark and leaves. Guardians where the magic breathes. Seas that churn with beasts untamed. Depths where kraken stakes its claim. Icy realms where frost won't fade. Cast in time the gods have made. Step through fire, brave the seas. Follow stars and ancient keys. Every answer waits inside. A world where endless dreams collide. Where wonders dance and dragons fly. Magic paints the endless sky. Mysteries carved in earth and stone. A realm that sings a world unknown.
And if you're still here, thank you, and I hope I see you soon. Please like, subscribe, and cheer me on in the comments.